Hello, you're listening to Cheat Sheet. I'm Anna Jones.
And I'm Kamali Melbourne. It is Friday, January the 23rd, and here's what we're looking at today.
Just last year, here in Davos, I ended my speech with the words, Europe needs to know how to defend itself. A year has passed, and nothing has changed.
The first ever trilateral talks will take place today between Ukrainian, Russian and American officials in Abu Dhabi.
President Trump has been heavily criticised for incorrectly saying NATO troops stayed off the front line during the fight in Afghanistan.
And TikTok has sealed a deal in the US to keep its business running there by creating a new entity that's separate from its Chinese operations.
Ukrainian, Russian and US officials will hold their first ever set of trilateral talks to try and bring about an end to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They're going to meet in the United Arab Emirates later on today. Now, this all follows the flurry of meetings that we've had in recent days between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky in Davos, as well as Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who've been in Moscow meeting Vladimir Putin.
Well, yeah, and it begs the question, how close are we to a deal? And we've had various comments being made by those involved. President Zelensky said yesterday that a peace plan was nearly ready, and that really matters. Donald Trump's special envoy, meanwhile, Steve Witkoff, as well as Jared Kushner, have landed in Moscow. They held talks late last night with Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. And Steve Witkoff has said, if both sides want to solve this, we're going to get it solved. And the fact that these talks in Abu Dhabi are going ahead, and the fact that it's the first time that we've got officials from Ukraine, from Russia and the US all in the same room, presumably, feels like a real step forward. And certainly the US envoy, Steve Witkoff, does sound pretty upbeat when he talks about just one issue remaining to be solved. But the problem is, it's a pretty big issue, isn't it? President Zelensky has confirmed that this one issue is about territory and the future status of eastern Ukraine. And we know that Ukraine isn't prepared to give up any land that's not yet been taken, or give up sovereignty of land that's currently occupied by the Russians. So that could be a real sticking point. What we know about the proposal is that the US are suggesting that Ukraine's industrial heartland, this area in the Donbass, becomes a demilitarized and free economic zone in exchange for security guarantees for Kyiv. But there's no knowing what Russia will make of that and what their response is likely to be.
You're right. I don't think we can overemphasize just how monumental it is that all three sides are going to be meeting in Abu Dhabi. It's the first time that the three have been able to get around a table to discuss bringing about an end to Russia's invasion. Now, they're saying that they're into the last mile. The last mile is always the most challenging. And as you say, it's about territory and whether or not Ukraine can concede some territory. There may be movement in that. But even if we're able to get to a ceasefire moment, there are some really key sticking points that could, in fact, scupper any deal that is agreed to. Now, any deal would have to be ratified by the Ukrainian parliament, the Duma, so there may end up being some internal politics involved in whatever transpires from any agreement that the sides reach. And then President Zelensky has also promised to put all of this to a referendum to the people of Ukraine. So the people who've had to live through 5 years of Russian invasion will then have to vote on whether or not this deal stands up to scrutiny. So quite high bars, one would think, in the event that there is a ceasefire. Now, we're going to probably hear more about security guarantees as well as a result of these talks. But with what's happened with Greenland over the past few weeks, that situation has taken further impetus that those guarantees will have to be concrete for the Ukrainians to accept them.
Now, Donald Trump has been criticised for claiming NATO troops stayed a little off the front lines in Afghanistan. Labour MP Emily Thornberry, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee here, has called it an absolute insult to the 457 British service personnel killed in the conflict.
It's extraordinary. The president repeated his criticism of NATO, saying he was not sure the alliance would be there if the US ever needed them. The president's comments have been deemed grossly offensive across the political spectrum, as you can imagine. Now, the UK suffered the second highest number of military deaths in Afghanistan, behind the US, which saw 2,461 deaths. And of course, this comes as a result of all this talk around Greenland and Donald Trump wanting to take control of that. The Danes, who responded to that call of Article 5 and came to the US's defense following the attacks of September 11th, lost the most people per capita in Afghanistan. So for him to say that NATO allies stayed off the front line It's just not true.
Well, yeah, and it's all part of Donald Trump's argument, isn't it, that the US is treated unfairly somehow by NATO. And he says that the US always do all the heavy lifting in the alliance, but it has deeply offended the many veterans and their families, of course. Lord Sedwill, who's the former British ambassador to Afghanistan, has also talked about this. He said that Donald Trump's claim is simply wrong. He said that the families of veterans would be right to be offended. And he said the Americans took the burden, but the UK and Denmark had a higher rate of casualties. He also says they were engaged in some of the most vicious fighting in some of the most dangerous areas. And I noticed that one mother whose 18-year-old son died in Helmand province said that he was absolutely on the front line. She said that her family live with the daily trauma of his death and that President Trump has no compassion. Yeah. And it's not the first time we've heard criticism from within the Trump administration of operations in Afghanistan. Pete Hegseth, who's now called Secretary of War, isn't he? He himself, a veteran, has said in the past that his fellow army guardsmen would joke that ISAF, the acronym on their shoulder patches, which stood for International Security Assistance Force, really stood for I saw Americans fighting. So Trump not the only one to make light of allies' contributions.
It's just extraordinary that this administration would decide to do this. But, Trump has a history of disrespecting the military, not just allies, but his own military as well. Remember, this is a man who dodged the draft. He refused to go to Vietnam. He said he had bone spurs in his ankles, which meant that he didn't go to fight for his country. He then, back in 2016, you may remember this, mimicked and mocked the family of a US soldier who died fighting for his country in Iraq. He also mocked John McCain for being captured in the Vietnam War as well. So he has a history of disrespecting the military. It really speaks to a man with a limited understanding of history. And it's only going to raise the impetus for NATO members to try and wean themselves off reliance on the United States. As Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, said earlier this week, the Western alliance has ruptured. And how can it be seen in any other way when the head of the most powerful nation in that alliance consistently disparages his alleged allies? Now, the Home Secretary is said to be planning to drastically cut the number of police forces in England and Wales. Right now, there were 43, and with the reforms planned, Shabana Mahmood hopes to merge certain aspects of them, especially back office functions. She wants to cut the bureaucracy that's involved in policing. And the thought is that it will free up far more resources to support frontline policing. A white paper is due out on this. We're expecting it next week, but it's thought the reforms could take about a decade to come into effect.
Yeah, and it's not a new idea, this, is it, Kamali? And it's certainly one that divides people as well. You've got some police chiefs who have been calling for reforms. They back a reduction in the number of forces. But then you've got the Tories saying it's not a good idea. You've also got the Police Federation, which represents officers from the rank of constable to chief inspectors, saying that fewer forces doesn't guarantee more or better policing for communities. So interesting to see the detail of this white paper. Interesting to get that suggestion of a time frame, how long it might all take, and to see what the reaction is. Yeah. TikTok has finalised a deal to create a new American entity, avoiding the looming threat of a ban in the United States that's been in discussion for years. So President Trump threatened to ban the app in the States this time a year ago, unless its Chinese owner ByteDance handed over its American operations to a non-Chinese entity. So many senior officials in the States have long felt that ByteDance represented a threat to US national security, but this deal seems to allay those fears.
Yeah, TikTok users will be happy. And also there's politicians who use TikTok to reach people that other media can't reach. Will be happy, I guess, about this too. Now, we've got some detail about the National Monument for the late Queen Elizabeth II. An update from the Memorial Committee and the Cabinet Officers said that the main statue on the mall will show the previous monarch standing, not riding a horse, as earlier depictions had showed. The final design is set to be made public in April to coincide with the centenary of the late Queen's birth. Now, Karen Newman, who spent 20 years working as a sculptor for Madame Tussauds, will design a second, smaller tribute dedicated to the Queen, and that'll be on Birdcage Walk in the centre of town.
Yeah, and I like the fact when she talked about this, she said her approach was going to be to combine elements of the Queen's life in the sculpture, showing her both as an icon and as an individual.
Yes, she should. Well, that is today's cheat sheet. If you've got a story that you think we should cover, do get in touch. Our email address is cheatsheet@sky.uk. And remember to follow the feed so you never miss an episode.